They said the desert had a way of exposing a man, peeling him down to the bones of who he really was. And as the lone cowboy rode through the dying light of dusk, dust clinging to his boots and regret heavier than the rifle on his back, he felt that truth pressing in on him from every side. Because he wasn't just lost on the map, he was lost in himself, wandering between bad decisions and worse memories, until the saloon appeared like a mirage, carved out of stubborn wood and flickering lanterns, standing alone where no building had a right to be. And when he stepped inside, the noise fell quiet in a way that meant trouble, because every eye in the room turned not toward him, but toward her, seated backward on a chair like she owned the place and every soul inside it. Her boots hooked over the rungs, her hat tipped low, her smile slow and dangerous. And when her eyes finally lifted to meet his, sharp as a knife finding skin, she spoke the words that would follow him like a curse for the rest of his life. "Cowboy," she said softly, letting the words stretch. "Is your mind always between my legs? Or is that why you look so lost out here?" The room sucked in a breath, waiting for blood or laughter, but neither came. Because the cowboy didn't blush or bristle, he froze, as if she had reached inside him and grabbed something he didn't know had a name. And she saw it instantly, the flicker behind his eyes, the way his hand hovered near his belt not out of threat but habit, the way men did when they didn't know where else to place themselves. And she laughed then, low and knowing, standing slowly, circling him like a wolf that had already decided he was worth the trouble, telling him without touching him that she could see the weight he carried, the questions he never asked out loud, the hunger that wasn't about flesh but about meaning. And with every word she spoke, she stripped him of another illusion, until he realized this woman wasn't flirting, she was dissecting him. And he had never been more exposed in his life. She told him her name was Mara, said it like a challenge, said she ran this stretch of desert not with guns but with truths people didn't want to hear. And when he tried to leave, tried to reclaim his pride, she stopped him with nothing but a sentence, asking where he was headed when every road he'd taken had already failed him. And that question landed harder than any bullet, because he had no answer. And the desert outside seemed suddenly wider, colder, less forgiving. She offered him a drink, not as kindness but as a test, watching him choose whether to sit or run. And when he sat, she smiled like she'd just won something valuable, leaning in close enough for him to smell smoke and sun on her skin, whispering that men like him always thought they were chasing something wild when in truth they were running from the quiet terror of being seen. And she told him if he stayed, if he listened, he might finally learn what he'd been circling his whole life without understanding. The night stretched long, her words pulling stories out of him he had buried under years of dust and violence. And with every confession, he felt both smaller and stronger, because she didn't judge him, she understood him. And that understanding was more dangerous than hatred. By the time dawn threatened the horizon, the cowboy realized he hadn't found shelter from the desert at all. He'd walked straight into its heart, and it wore a woman's face and a smile sharp enough to cut him open. And as he stepped back outside, with her voice echoing in his mind, he knew his journey had changed, that he could no longer pretend he was just passing through life untouched. Because once someone names your confusion, once someone calls you out and dares you to stay, there's no going back to being lost without knowing it. And if this story already has its hooks in you, if you want to know what happens when a man confronts the truths he's been avoiding and a woman who refuses to let him lie, then don't ride on without us. Morning in the desert came without mercy, the sun rising like a verdict rather than a promise. And the cowboy found himself awake before the heat, sitting on the edge of the porch outside the saloon with Mara's words still crawling through his head like restless spirits, because some truths, once spoken, refused to stay quiet. And when she stepped out beside him carrying the tin cups of coffee, as if the night before had been nothing more than a casual conversation rather than a dismantling of his soul, he understood that whatever game she was playing had only just begun. She didn't ask if he slept, didn't ask if he was staying. She simply handed him the cup and looked out at the horizon, like she was measuring the world against something only she could see. And then she told him that lost men always thought they needed a road when what they really needed was a reckoning. And she asked him how many towns he had burned bridges in, how many names he had outlived, How many versions of himself he had buried without ever stopping to mourn them. And with every question, the desert seemed to lean closer, listening, daring him to lie. He tried to laugh it off, tried to reclaim the easy swagger that had carried him through gunfights and long nights. But she cut through it with a single look, telling him that confidence worn like armor always rusted first, and that what she saw in him wasn't weakness but exhaustion, the kind that came from running too long in the wrong direction. Then she told him why the town existed at all, how it wasn't marked on any map because it wasn't meant to save people, only to stop them long enough to decide whether they would keep pretending or finally change. And she said she stayed because watching men face themselves was the closest thing to justice she had ever known. As the day wore on, she pulled him into the rhythm of the place, not as a guest but as a participant, making him listen to stories he would normally ignore, making him see the fear behind bravado, the lies behind smiles, until he realized she was teaching him how to see without turning away. And that skill terrified him more than any outlaw ever had. Trouble came, as it always did, in the form of men who mistook silence for weakness and assumed Marat's sharp tongue was an invitation rather than a warning. And when fists clenched and hands drifted toward holsters, the cowboy felt the old instincts rise up, the familiar thrill of violence offering itself as an easy answer. But Mara stopped him with nothing more than her voice, reminding him that every fight he'd ever won had cost him something he never got back, and asking him what he was willing to lose this time. The standoff dissolved without a shot fired, and in that moment he understood the depth of her power, that she didn't dominate through force but through clarity, through the refusal to let chaos be the loudest voice in the room. As evening returned and the desert cooled, he admitted aloud what he had never said before, that he didn't know who he was without the road, without the gun, without the story he told himself to survive. And Mara listened without interruption, then told him that identity wasn't something you found, it was something you chose, again and again, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. When he finally mounted his horse to leave, the town behind him quiet and watchful, she didn't ask him to stay and she didn't ask him to remember her. She only said that the next time he felt lost, he should ask himself whether he was searching for escape or truth. And as he rode away, the desert no longer felt empty but alive, filled with possibility and consequence. And for the first time in years, the cowboy wasn't afraid of the space ahead of him, because he understood that being lost wasn't a curse, it was an invitation. And if you've ridden this far with him, if this story has made you question the roads you're on and the truths you're avoiding, then don't let the journey end here. Subscribe to the channel, because more Wild West stories are waiting, and each one might just help you find something you didn't know you were missing.